High FM, 101.9 megahertz of life.
Good morning, everybody, and this is Sarah Gone Rogue, and I'm here to present more politics and politics-adjacent issues, local and international. This is to really reinforce probably largely a bad mood, but hell, 101.9 High FM has to do it, and somebody has to do it, and I'm it. So we'll start off with probably the Schadenfreude issue of the week, and that is that the new Irish government has a jet that may struggle to land in bad weather because it was ordered without key equipment from an Israeli firm. Now, the €53 million Dassault Falcon 6S aircraft would normally include Elbit's Falcon Eye low visibility system of cameras and sensors that give pilots additional information amid fog or darkness. And that's what I know about the Irish weather, is that there's lots of fog and darkness frequently. What happened is in 2024, the Irish government said it wasn't going to enter into contracts with the Israeli companies anymore. It is probably one of the most anti-Semitic states in Europe. So it would have, in doing so, they would have gone a step too far. Now, the Irish Defence Department has not confirmed or denied the absence of the system. And they say there are no current limits on the operational capability of the aircraft. However, the newspaper, The Journal, cites pilots as saying the lack of the Falcon Eye system does limit pilots' options for landing in foggy weather. I love this. I mean, talk about shooting yourself in the foot, and it really is a moment of Schadenfreude for the principled stance against all things Israel, and it's absolutely quite crazy. And I don't know what they think they're doing, but what can I say? Geh gesund. We'll cover a range of issues, some more fun than others. We're going to deal with the suspension of high-level employees in the government service. We'll be looking at the expropriation without compensation court cases that were heard in Monday in the Western Cape High Court. And we'll also look at polling that shows the ANC's favourability is essentially in free fall. In fact, let's start with that, just because the figures are so extraordinary. What's happened is nationally, and this is a poll done by the Social Research Foundation, which is linked to Common Sense, it has found that the ANC has fallen to 34% nationally, down from nearer 40% earlier in this year. DA remains stable, MKP has risen to 15%, while the EFF remains flat on 7%. But the really, really fascinating result of the survey, and I haven't got details, but let's go for it. The most fascinating thing is that in Johannesburg and eThekwini, the ANC is polling below or at 20%. In Tshwane, it is just above 30%. However, in Joburg, the DA is at 40%, and it is also above the ANC's figures in Tshwane. So your vote will count. Your vote will count.
High FM, your station of choice since 2008.
Well, let's look at a number of other issues, and the first one is the idea that, or the problem that ANC cadres are killing each other for political positions. Now, this should present a real problem, because it's Mpazima Shilowa, who is a former General Secretary of Congress, of the Congress of COSATU, Congress of South African Trade Unions, and Gauteng Premier from 1999 to 2008, has said that people in the ANC are killing each other for positions, or for a position as a municipal councillor, as the party's support shrinks. And we've just heard how much the party support has shrunk. He he was one of the founders of COPE, together with the late Musia Lekota. Now, I think I saw an estimate that the ANC could lose about 500 municipal seats in the next election. So perhaps the killing season is starting. It's an extraordinary thing. It's become an extraordinary habit that can only probably happen in South Africa at this stage. So that's that. The other thing to say is that there is essentially Anglo-American slow motion departure from South Africa. Now, Anglo-American is a household name. As I say, it was founded in 109 years ago by Harry Oppenheimer's father, whose first name I suddenly forget. And it was the foundational engine of South African industrialization. And today, Kumba iron ore is virtually the only major asset remaining in South Africa. It matters because Anglo-American's interim results have delivered stellar headline growth because of a surge in copper. Underlying earnings jumped to 35%. And the free cash flow that it's achieved has skyrocketed to nearly 150%. Dividends have nearly tripled. Yet despite this extraordinary financial success, there's a seismic geopolitical shift. Essentially, Anglo is systematically cutting its ties with South Africa. It recently confirmed the sale of its steelmaking and coal operations, which predominantly are to be found in South Africa, and it's in advanced negotiations to offload its 85% stake in De Beers. At roughly a tenth of the price it paid the Oppenheimer family 10 years ago to acquire its stake. Its pending merger with Teck shifts the corporate centre of gravity from South Africa to Vancouver. And so the bottom line is what investors are addressing is really a corporate migration in real time and a historic departure from a company, as I say, that is a household name. So it's really, I guess, actually tragic. Now, let's look at another issue, and that is the real value of the rand. Now, currently, the rand is trading at approximately 16.53 to the dollar, but the famous Big Mac index indicates it is significantly undervalued, and many economists consider the South African currency volatile compared to stable currencies such as the dollar and the UK pound. It was close to 18 rand to the dollar about a year ago. Its strongest level hit in this year, hit 15 rand 19 against the dollar, showing how the value swings over a relatively short period of time. Now, according to the Big Mac index, we should be trading closer to 11 rand 43. Now, the Big Mac index was developed in case you don't know, was developed by The Economist magazine to compare currencies by looking at the cost of a McDonald's Big Mac in every country. Now, what it does is compare the prices for a specific item and highlights the purchasing power of different countries. Obviously, this is not an exact economic measure, but it helps to understand the purchasing power parity with using an understandable concept. It does fail to account for the relative cost of living of making a Big Mac in different countries. On short trade, it should be at 9 rand 15 to the dollar, and the indication is that roughly the level of undervaluation of the rand is about by 44%. It is the 10th most undervalued currency against the dollar, behind, ironically, currencies such as the Ukraine hryvnia and the Hong Kong dollar. So, and surprise, the value of the currency is largely driven by a country's economic sentiment, and particularly linking it to its current trajectory. And probably almost every political issue we deal with, and deals with the lack of growth and high levels of unemployment that we have seen under the policies of the ANC since the early 2000s. And despite, what are we looking at now, 22 years of stagnant and then falling growth, you have to wonder, the free fall, and this would be tied directly to the free fall of the support for the ANC in the country, and particularly in the three major metros of Johannesburg, Ekurhuleni, and Tshwane. So there you have it. I mean, it just beggars description. What we will further do is go into more detail after the break to look at an issue that has been extraordinarily problematic in South Africa, and that has been the suspension of public service. It's both who's been suspended. I'm not going to go into great detail, just give examples, and why they've been suspended, and how long they stay on suspension. So, stay tuned into 109.9 Chai FM.
Chai FM, your station of choice since 2008.
Now, this issue of suspension of public servants has been a problem for many years, and particularly at the higher levels. Now, you have the problem of, for reasons of cadre deployment and BEE, having issues like corruption, incompetence, or just envy on the part of colleagues, or dissatisfaction on the part of colleagues, poor performance, etc. And one of the most recent and highlighted suspensions was that of the general manager of the Tshwane Municipal Council. Now, they sought out Metler to join the council, and I think he was in the Eastern Cape or before that. He's one of the best managers, city managers in the country. He's honest, he's hardworking, he knows his stuff, and probably the biggest problem is that he's been trying to sort out corruption in Tshwane, in the Tshwane city. So he was suspended. Now, listen to the grounds for his suspension. Metler was removed following a motion by the EFF's Tshwane leader, Obakeng Ramaboda, who accused him of maladministration, making irregular appointments, and failing to conduct the mandatory vetting of some officials appointed to the Tshwane Metro Police Department. Now, that's bad enough and probably have very little truth to it. But Metler has challenged his suspension in the Gauteng division of the High Court in Pretoria, and has been granted interim relief in his application, which will come into immediate effect. So he's had to be put back into his position at the Tshwane Council. Now, the ruling of the court was that the Speaker lacked the authority to determine which councillors' votes counted. 92 councillors voted in favour and 82 against. 19 votes received 90. He received 19 votes cast by councillors who had been specifically granted leave of absence to perform council functions. Now, if those votes had been counted, which they were meant to be, Metler would not have been suspended. So there are two possible options. The one is that the Speaker didn't know the rules or got the rules wrong, or it was deliberate. And South Africa, being South Africa, will go for the latter, will go for the deliberate. Now, the Mayor, Nazipi Moya, has said she acknowledges the court order and respects the role of the judiciary in resolving disputes of this nature. I will comply fully with the order insofar as it directs relief against me. I wonder whether she means it, or really it's just saying the right thing in the circumstances when she has no other choice. There were a number of respondents within the city to the application, each of whom had apparently fulfilled distinct statutory and institutional responsibility in relation to the process of applying the disciplinary regulations for senior management. So the judgment focused really on procedure, not on the actual substance or merits of the case. Now, back in the day when I was a labour lawyer, one of the things that we advised our clients repeatedly to ensure was that when they conducted a disciplinary hearing, particularly one that could end in a dismissal, they make sure that all the technical aspects, how the companies have laid down disciplinary hearings would be run, get that right. Because if you get the technical details right, you're more likely at the end to get the substantive issues right as well. So don't have a disciplinary hearing overturned in a court because you've got the process is wrong. And we found as companies adhere to that, the rate of having incorrect judgments against them dropped quite dramatically. It doesn't bring the process to an end, but it requires that the allegations of misconduct be investigated according to the law and the interests of accountability. Now, Celias Brink, who was the mayor of Cape Town until a year or so ago, has said the following: by setting aside the unlawful decisions of the ANC, EFF and Action SA coalition to suspend Tshwane City Manager Johan Metler, the court has reaffirmed that political majorities cannot ignore the law, manipulate council processes or use municipal institutions to protect politically connected individuals. And the reason given is that the aim was to install an acting city manager at the start of the municipal financial year, gain control over the city's budget, and open the door to looting. Yes, there we have it. And there have been, the public service is littered with people who, at high levels, who earn very high salaries, being suspended for years. Some never reach a hearing and their salary keeps being paid. Millions and millions and millions, probably reaching the billions by now. And, this goes against the principle, the fundamental principle in workplace discipline, that you discipline within a reasonable time after the information that warrants the disciplinary hearing being held. Now, this could be as short as a few days if it's a simple matter, but with high-level people, it's usually quite a long process. It may take 1 or 2 months, but that's not a problem. That's absolutely fine. It makes sense, and you want to get it right, so you want to do the work properly. It just beggars description. I mean, I once arbitrated a hearing against a senior manager who, I think I can't remember which. I can't remember. It was something like, it was some city manager position. I just don't. I think it was city manager, or it was something like, I think Eskom. It could have been Eskom. He had been on suspension for 3 years, earning pretty much R1 million a year in that process. And eventually, when a decent human resources manager was appointed, the arbitration actually came into effect. The allegations concerned sexual harassment, and they were actually quite concerning. They concerned a number of women, some of whom had left their employment as a result, and one who, in fact, they attribute her death to the harassment and the failure to have the matter dealt with. The other issue to talk about today in this regard is the Public Investment Corporation's suspension of the CEO, Patrick Dlamini, and this was done last month. Now, the purpose of the PIC is to manage public sector funds and investment portfolios on behalf of the government, social security, and public service entities. And the prime vehicle for this is the employees' pension fund, the government employees' pension fund, rather. And it has a dual mandate. It must generate strong financial returns, and it must support the state's development goals. Now, the Dlamini suspension came about as a result of what's considered a controversial whistleblower for trying to centralize power by bypassing the board, intervening in investment decisions, and invoking political protection. Now, the judge in this case also rejected the application. They rejected the application by two individuals to intervene and found that Dlamini's suspension was unlawful. None of the procedural requirements for suspension were followed. His suspension will have to be initiated by a Human Resources Committee, which it wasn't done. It also has to be approved by the Finance Minister in consultation with the Cabinet, given the importance of the entity. And all its policies were disregarded. Now, there have been controversial investments, under the PIC. It's legal battles and disagreements over the Lanseria airport dispute. There's the Acapulco trade and investment internal grievance, which resulted in launching internal governance probes and created severe media scrutiny. There was the Daybreak food collapse, where the PIC's multi-billion rand unlisted investment in Daybreak Chicken Farm suffered catastrophic mismanagement, massive job losses, and widespread operational failure. So it also symbolized the ongoing risks within the Isibaya fund of the portfolio that the PIC was managing. It's basically been it's just been a complete free-for-all. But the thing about it that is so extraordinary is that the PIC manages a humongous 3.7 trillion rand. I don't know how many noughts that includes, of public servants' money. It's the pension fund for the public service, and it's a defined pension fund, and there are not many of those left, which means that the taxpayers are ultimately on the hook for any losses suffered. Because what a defined benefit fund does in a workplace retirement plan is it guarantees a specific pre-agreed payout for life. The income is a regular payment for the rest of your life, as I say, guaranteed. It uses formulas that are based on length of service, an accrual rate like 1/60th, and a final career average salary. Now, given the size, the bloated size of our public service, particularly our national and provincial, across the board, all levels of the public service, that explains the trillions of rands that have been spent, or that that the PIC rather is responsible for. So it doesn't mean that the suspension may not have been warranted, although that seemed to be likely. But the complete failure again to follow process is what is getting the PIC into trouble. And these court cases cost a lot, and who's paying for them? We are. So, surprise, surprise in that regard. But the place where you have seen very, very late suspensions, just by way of comparison, has been the Tembisa Hospital debacle that resulted in the assassination of Babita Dekorian. I mean, that is a real shame. I mean, it's absolutely shameless. Eventually, the CEO and the COO were put on suspension. And I don't know, I think the COO or the CFO, I think that is the correct term, the financial officer remains on suspension, but I haven't looked at it recently. The CEO died while on suspension, but he'd been receiving his very high salary over that period, and presumably as a public servant, his family, his spouse, would be entitled to the fund that he has that he had benefit of. And as I recall, the wife also challenged the failure to get access to the pension fund. So, sorry, I'd forgotten about that, but maybe a little less money will be shelled out in the process. Now, a little story that caught my eye, for a whole lot of reasons, and perhaps Schadenfreude is one of them, is that if you remember, Oprah Winfrey opened a South African school established here, which was intended to build a school that was invested with creating or getting girls to express limitless potential, and it was really intended to transform the futures of girls through education. And Oprah Winfrey said at the time that it had been a dream of hers, as she'd never simply built a school, and she was excited that this next chapter would allow them to reach even more young women across South Africa and continue the promise that began more than 20 years ago. Now, where the school is located is in Henley-on-Klip near Meyerton in Gauteng, and it will remain tied to education, but it will be returned to the Gauteng Department of Education as per the original partnership agreement. Now, given the appalling conduct of this department in many respects, and the Pretoria High School for Girls would is the most immediate example. They're accused of racism and really treated unbelievably badly by the department. I mean, it was really the department that went in looking for racism, although there was no racism to be found. So I don't have very much confidence that the Department of Education will keep the standards of the Oprah Winfrey School up. I really, it's as Oprah Winfrey's sort of magnanimous project goes. This was really. I don't foresee a maintenance of standards and a glorious sort of realization of potential in these young women. And I remember at the time she did this, and I remember being somewhat skeptical about, whether it would remain, it would work, it would stay or become and stay competent. And it probably has been over the last 20 years. I'm not entirely sure, but it looks like this is not going to be I don't know. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But I'm not so sure about it. Basically, apparently, it's seen since its inception in 2007, over 1,000 graduates, many of whom they say have gone on to read at what they call read at the world's finest universities. When they talk read finest, read at a degree at a university, they're usually talking about a top-notch university like Oxford or Cambridge in the UK and Harvard in the USA. I think it was well-meaning, and I think there's merit in single-sex schools for a whole lot of reasons, particularly for girls. But who knows? Maybe I'm being unduly pessimistic.
High FM, 101.9 megahertz of life.
Now, I said, that 101.9 High FM would be bringing to you some discussion of civil society organizations challenging the legality of the Expropriation Act. Now, the fundamentals of, there's a fundamental issue which will come out, but that we also heard in Monday. I think it was in the Cape High Court. I'm not quite sure. Maybe it was Gauteng, and it's the culmination of a protracted and contentious fight over expropriation without compensation. Now, AfriForum and the IRR Institute of Race Relations Legal are arguing that Section 12(3) of the Act be declared inconsistent with the Constitution and invalid. They contend that the expropriation is unconstitutional, serves no rational purpose, and is inconsistent with customary international law. Now, the ANC has always been ambivalent about private property rights and long argued that existing restitution processes are not enough to correct historical injustices that concern land. Now, we feel, and they felt, that the solution to this is to strengthen rather than weaken existing property rights, which are already enshrined in the Constitution. So, and this has had a terrible effect on the extent of our foreign investment, particularly because if there's one thing foreign investors want, it is knows that the ownership of their asset, of their property, is secure. The other one is the requirement to have the BEE requirement to have, black board members on their boards, without, when they don't want to, they want to make sure that if they are, even if they're black or white or whatever color, that they can serve the function and are competent. The key issue is that what the ANC now wants to do is to use expropriation legislation to confiscate land for nil compensation. Initially, it tried to amend the Constitution, but the property rights clause and Bill of Rights clause in general, under which it falls, requires a 2/3 majority. And ironically, they didn't get that majority because the economic freedom fighters, the EFF, did not support the change. I think they didn't think it was radical enough, ironically, but that's what's happened. So what the president did was then he openly proclaimed that the government would seek to introduce EWC through ordinary legislation, thus, and in do so, they would thus invert the supremacy of said piece of legislation. Now, if you recall, the Act was passed in 2024, just before the national elections. I mean, how tight is that? Its actual signing into law came into effect in January 2025. Now, just to note that the Free Market Foundation, through its Rule of Law project, has been admitted to the court as an amicus curiae. And the idea is to put forward arguments against the nil compensation that go above the what's being argued by the other parties, but it doesn't seek any orders of any kind. They've also said that there's a contradiction to Section 25(2) of the Constitution, which stipulates that the state may only take property, A, for public purpose or in the public interest, and subject to compensation, the amount of which must be agreed or decided by a court, not the government, not the local council, and the time and manner of payment must also be fixed. And it just beggars belief that the government has played around with rights as important as property ownership. What essentially is being argued by the FMF is that zero is not a form of compensation, but is rather confiscation, not expropriation, and that the words compensation, amount and payment all mean that there should be some form of compensation in the event of expropriation by the state. And the court said that the government must give meaning to every word in the Constitution. It simply can't avoid words like compensation, amount, and payment. Essentially, the amount of null compensation, if that's not a contradiction in terms, has been declined has been argued as inconsistent with the Constitution and is invalid as a result. Now, the FMF has also held that the Expropriation Act is unconstitutional, serves no rational purpose, and is inconsistent with customary law practices. Now, the thing to bear in mind is there are two things to bear in mind. One is that international law, which a court is required to consider when interpreting right, and to which South African government is a signatory to various bilateral investment treaties and other international agreements, it has an obligation to compensate foreigners who own property in South Africa, where the property is the subject of expropriation under Section 12. Now, again, just beggars belief. It produces this unfair double standard. It's just outrageous. One of the final issues to deal with is that virtually the largest land owner in the country are not whites. They're not even blacks, who are currently the biggest owners of certain types of land. It is the government. So the government has plenty of land, obviously not necessarily meet the requirements to be expropriated, but certainly some of it, I'm sure, could be, and then the compensation issue doesn't arise. Now, there's a vast amount of land to be dealt with, and surely it makes the most sense for the government to essentially use it for the purposes that it needs. It doesn't have to pay for the land. The land is already there, and the Department of Public Works can just get on that land and put in roads, or Eskom can put on pylons or whatever may be needed, bridges, in order to do the necessary. So it's really it's kind of what one's come to expect from the ANC government, that it not only creates policies that just do nothing for the citizens of South Africa, as we've seen through our discussion today, but it's done everything badly. It's just not doing anything more anymore. It either doesn't know how levels of incompetence are too high, or departments are losing money to corruption and malfeasance. God only knows. But it's the creation of lots of solid and necessary infrastructure is the most important thing to the creation of economic growth and employment.
High FM, your station of choice since 2008.
And my final point for discussion should have steam coming out of your ears. But I'm sorry about that, but I just feel it's something we have to raise. Now, an elderly gentleman who was using the Steve Biko eye clinic became permanently blind in his right eye. The issue started in February, and he essentially had to wait for 6 months to get the retinal surgery he needed to save his eyesight. There were just multiple complications at the eye clinics and all sorts of things. Now they're desperately trying to save his left eye. Now, most of you will know that it essentially, a detached retina is a critical medical emergency that requires surgery literally within hours or days to save someone's sight. And as care is delayed, it drastically lowers the chance of saving sight. Now, so we're looking at very short time to prevent detachment spreading. It also prevents the creation of the detachment spreading from to the center of the eye. You've also got central vision lost by what they call, that was macular on. You also have central vision issues lost with macular off degeneration. And they say that it must be done as soon as possible, though the final visual recovery may be less complete the longer the tissue goes without blood and oxygen. There's no safe waiting period. Every hour counts and every day counts. Now, apparently, the reason for the failure is that there's a machine called a compressor and suction system, or there's a compressor and suction system which is needed for operating Constellation machinery, which had broken down and has yet to be replaced. Now, the Democratic Alliance has urgently asked the Gauteng MEC for Health to urgently intervene to ensure the immediate procurement of the required equipment and to restore retinal surgery services at the Steve Biko Hospital. Countless patients have been affected by this, and other patients indicated that during follow-up examination, the clinic had informed him that they were not yet performing retinal surgeries because they hadn't resolved the problem with the equipment. There has been huge frustration among the specialists who do the surgery, and they raised 10,000 rand to try and get the equipment needed. But the final kick in the teeth is the Gauteng Health Department failed to act with urgency and said that the situation was under control, and they refused to let the doctors provide the money to get the equipment. It had to go through the normal procurement channels, the ones that result in corruption and backhanded payments. So there you have it. I mean, it's just absolutely unbelievable. So with that little story in mind, a devoid retinal operation care at Steve Biko Hospital. That's it from me for the week. You can follow me on my Substack, which is Sara, SARA, 281.substack.com. So have a wonderful week. I hope to come back to you with more good news, but I don't guarantee it. And I will see you again in 2 weeks' time. Thanks. Enjoy.